the prophet, and Elisha, his understudy, his first assistant, his armor bearer. And also in our text, we find there are 4 primary locations that is identified in our text on today. We see in verse 1 that the first place that is given is called Gilgal. Gilgal. They were getting ready to leave from Gilgal. Now, one of the primary terms or understandings of the word Gilgal is simply circles. Of course, in 2007, we don't say circles, we say cycles. They were leaving the place of repeated cycles. If you're going to see what God has for your life, you must leave the place of repeated cycles. You got to stop doing the same thing leading to nothing. You're going to have to rise up and leave the place of cycles. In verse 2, we find our second place. We find here, as he's getting ready to leave, the prophet speaks to his understudy, and Elijah says to Elisha, he says, look, tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel. Now, the word Bethel is a compound word. There is the word Beth, which means house of, and El, which is the root word for God. Now, of course, in the Hebrew, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, when it says, in the beginning, God created, that word God there is El, which talks about the creative powers of God. It speaks how God created something out of nothing. So therefore, Bethel is the place where God creates something out of nothing on behalf of his people. And so now the prophet begins to speak to his understudy and says, Elisha, why don't you stay here in Gilgal, because I have to go to Bethel. But Elisha is not in tune with the voice of the prophet. He's in tune with destiny, and he says, I cannot stay in a place of repeated cycles because God has more for me than this. And so he rises up and he journeys with the prophet and finds himself at Bethel. Here are the sons of the prophet saying unto him, don't you realize that your master will no longer be your master after today? And of course, when you are in tune with God, sometimes you have to tell people who are with you to be quiet. Because when they don't understand what God is doing through you and what God is taking you to, they will make you stop in a place that's a blessing for them, but may not be your destiny. And so today you can't stop even at the house of Bethel. I know God is blessing you there. I know he's making ways for you. I know he's opening doors for you. But Bethel is not your destiny. Why don't you look at somebody and say, keep moving. And so as we carry on to verse number 4, we find ourselves at the third place, the third landmark. And here the prophet says unto him, Elijah says, I tarry, I pray you, I petition you, stay here in Bethel, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho. Now, the thing about Jericho has many meanings, but there are 2 primary meanings. The first primary meaning is Moon City. Moon City. And what happens, if you know, the moon only comes out at night. And so what happened was, when nighttime fell, when the moon would come up, it would light up the city of Jericho. And so what the prophet was telling unto Elisha, he says, you ought to stay here in this place of darkness because your ministry will prosper because there's a light inside of you. And God can use you right here in this place of darkness. Your ministry will blow up because of what God is doing in your life. And he can use you in this place of darkness. But even with that, Elisha says, no, I realize that my personal ministry will flourish. But he also recognized the second part of the second meaning of Jericho, which means a walled city, a fenced place. He said, the reason I can't stay here is even though my ministry will prosper, my spirit will die because I'm too boxed in. And I can't stay in a place where my ministry is doing good, but my spirit man is dying. And some of you got up and you gave up the president of the usher board. You gave up being chairperson of Men Day. You gave up being chairperson of Women Day to come to Greater St. Stephen so your spirit can be fed. Because you recognize, even though I'm sitting in a place where I'm being recognized, my spirit is dying. Look at somebody, say, keep moving. Because if you start shouting in there, they want a board meeting. If you start speaking in tongues in there, they might want to put you out. But you need to be in a place where it agrees with your spirit. And so I'll give up everything as long as my spirit, man, is fed. Touch somebody and say, I had to leave, I had to leave. The last place that we arrive at is in verse 6. Here we find ourselves at Jordan. And the prophet is saying the same thing to his first assistant. He says, stay here. The Lord has sent me. Oh, I like this, I like this. Because now Jordan is not like the Red Sea. I mean, the Red Sea was massive and it was over their heads. But Jordan was a little river. But the term Jordan means descending. This is the picture. They had to walk across Jordan, but the waters flowed downwardly. And so as they were going across, the waters would push them downwardly away from their destiny. And I don't know if you ever tried to go straight, but things of life come and push you downwardly. You're trying to do the right thing, but life pushes you downwardly. Matter of fact, the Apostle Paul said it like this in Romans chapter 7. He said, that what I do not do. But that I would hate to do, that's what I find myself doing. Or in better words, he said it like this. Every time I attempt to do good, evil is present on every hand. I'm trying to live for God, but here she comes, fine as wine. I'm trying not to go back to being an alcoholic, but right when I'm in Walgreens, I walk past my favorite daiquiri. I'm trying not to go back into the world of sin, but something is coming after me. But this is what I love about Jordan. Elisha does not cross Jordan because he's anointed. Elisha does not cross Jordan because he's a tither. Elisha does not cross Jordan because he's a first fruiter. Elisha does not cross Jordan because he knows how to pray. Well, how did he cross Jordan? He had right connections. Some of y'all missed it. Let me show what happened. In the text, what happened when they got to Jordan, Elijah had the mantle. And because Elijah had the mantle, they were able to walk across on dry ground. Some of you can really testify that the reason you're walking across on dry ground is not because of all you've done, but because we have been connected to the man of God who has the mantle for this hour. Some of you got cars you couldn't afford because you were connected. Some of you got jobs you didn't have education for because you were connected. Some of you got healed because you were connected. Why don't you look at somebody and say, stay connected? Oh, I wish I had a real